Hi, this is Rob Seaman, and you're listening to Whole Earth Radio. Today, we're kicking off season 3 of our podcast with a very special guest. I'm honored to have on the show today Ric Scalzo, who is the founder of Gaia Herbs, the founder of the Ric Scalzo Institute for Botanical Research, most recently, the founder of Kokora, which is a really amazing new natural products herbal line that we will really get into here. Ric, thank you so much for your time today.
Rob, I'm honored to be with you today and to share some wonderful dialogue around herbs and herbal healing.
Yeah, thank you so much. I got into the industry in the 90s working in a health food store in North Carolina. Of course, you and Gaia were kind enough to have us up to the farm in Brevard, along with many herbalists and retailers over the years. And I think as a medical herbalist, you have done more to educate our industry and our community, really just about anybody I can think of. And it's amazing what you've been able to do.
Yeah, it's been a joy and it's been an honor to show up in that way. I have been at it for, let's see, my journey started a little earlier. It started in the early to mid 80s. And I went to school. I did all my herbal and naturopathic studies. And I want to say it was 8 or 10 years of naturopathic practice. I think I saw maybe 10,000 patients. I was pretty gifted to have skills in diagnostics, both pulse diagnostic and medical iris diagnostics. And so I use that as my diagnostic tool in a medical environment to help give me a kind of a constitutional profile of all the patients that came in. And it was my job to go out and harvest the herbs for the patients, make their medicines and dispense them. And that was really a great lesson for me to be able to apply herbs constitutionally that way. And it really taught me a lot. And it's what I love to share with people.
Yeah, and everything that you did with Gaia, so many people, thousands of people that came through your trainings and used your products. It might even get up into the millions if we look at folks that have benefited from your formulations over the years. But that was really the first chapter, as it were, because in 2019, you sold Gaia, the company you started and ran for many years,
It was about 30 years, maybe a
30
little over
years. Okay.
30 years when I decided to sell.
Yeah, and that led to the founding of the Ric Scalzo Institute for Botanical Research, which is part of Sonoran University. Is that right?
That's correct. At the time, it was this called the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine. Now it's become a university and called Sonoran University of Health Science. And there is a story behind that. It was about 20 years ago with the president of Sonoran, at that time Southwest College. He and I were going for a walk, and I said, at some point, Paul, Dr. Paul Mittman, I said, at some point, I want to see that herbal medicine, the herbal industry, has a home under the roof of a naturopathic institution. And when I sold Gaia, I was able to step up and make a donation to the university to build out the Research Institute. And now that Research Institute is 4 years old, and it's really amazing the work they're doing. Truly unprecedented work. We got sidetracked at Kokora, I'm sorry, at COVID, when
Oh,
COVID hit.
yeah.
Our work got sidetracked because we had to do all the research related to COVID, and we were one of the few institutions that could study the live virus with herbs. And so we came up with some amazing discoveries with herbs and treatment of COVID. I know we're not supposed to talk about that so much, but the work was fascinating, and we continue to do great work on research today.
And yeah, it's a great point. We got to be DSHEA compliant even in our podcast, right? But yeah, I think it's interesting to me, and I wonder if you feel like when I look at Kokora and your first wave of products, I wonder if you see a shift in the culture more towards food-like preparations, botanical medicine. And it made me think if we're taking herbs every day as part of a preventive model, is that going to be more effective or a different approach than an intervention model where we use herbs later on after someone gets sick. If we say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and you have these wonderful everyday formulas, is that really going to be more of an effective strategy?
I don't know if it's more of an effective strategy, but it is a necessary effective strategy because that takes you for the long haul, what you do every day. I always say, Rob, if you want to practice a health span and a lifespan that is worthy of, let's say, 100 years, you don't start when you're 50 or 60 or 70. You start when you're quite a bit earlier. And it's what you do every day that makes the difference. So these functional herbal powders, which are loaded with herbal adaptogens and super mushroom extracts, they are precisely what we need to combat the stress of the day and to boost our to support our immune function. And it's something you can do so easily to incorporate it into your drink or into your foods and smoothies, whatever. And I don't intend it to replace supplements or herbal supplements, but to complement it as something, yes, I'm doing this every day and I'm taking my adaptogens and mushrooms to support my well-being. And because I'm in it for the long haul, and I'm sure you are as well.
That's a nice point. That we need to look at things as either or. Certainly in this case, what would the most effective strategy would probably be to do both, right? To practice good health and food medicine every day. And if one needs an intervention, then the intervention might look a little different. If you have fluid extracts or other kinds of preparations that are more for acute symptoms and whatnot.
Yeah, and many people simply like an alternative to swallowing capsules. And so many people enjoy taking something that's optimally healthy for them if they know that it's going to add to their level of stress resiliency and their level of adaptation and the level of immune support, the level of calmness, their capacity to sleep better at night. What can you do every day that nourishes that? And I think the powders are a wonderful addition.
And one thing I just remember being blown away by things you presented at Brevard back in the day and others that you had brought in with the amount of attention to specific body systems in terms of things like, I don't know, a cyclic GMP or different parts of our bodies and our body systems, whereas traditional herbalism was a little broader in my experience prior to that was less, a lot of Western herbalism as I experienced it early on was less technical. It was more like this has traditionally been used for this. Here's what that symptom picture looks like. Here's how you use it. But it seemed like what you were doing at that point was really going to a deeper level of, I don't know if you'd call it like medical functionality, but just drilling down on body systems. Is that really still where you come from in terms of formulating and looking at things, or do you zoom out more now?
The really good point you raised, because if you were to do consumer demographic questioning surveys right now, it hasn't changed. What the number one driver for consumers' reason for our choice to consume herbal supplements is, are they safe and are they efficacious? And in other words, are they not only good for me, but are they safe for me? And are they going to make my life better in a way that I would expect? Consumers asking for the scientific evidence for efficacy. And that hasn't changed over all these years, Rob. It's still the number one driver in terms of what consumers question when they're looking at a herbal product. So that's one of the reasons why we started the Ric Scalzo Institute for Botanical Research to really give guidance on safety and efficacy. And we are doing that for all of the Kokora products get tested at the Institute.
And this really makes so much sense to me because this is like I say, when I personally came into this, I was really blown away by the scientific validation of herbal medicine, botanical medicine, just all the different iterations of that, all the different forms of that. But one thing I know that you're with me on is the idea that plants have an intelligence, that they have a wholeness. I think about, I've heard you say that Kokora, the slogan, I believe, is people, plants, and planet. Is that? Yeah,
Yeah.
and it just seems to me such a no-brainer, kind of common sense, but it's because I've heard you and other folks with that same mindset lecture for years. Isolates, do not represent the activity of the whole plant. There's just no comparison to an isolated compound and a broad spectrum extract or fresh herb preparation. How do we drive that home, and how often does the science miss that point?
So often it misses it. But you said something at the start of this question, plants have intelligence. And I would like to just comment on that because it relates to when you look at the phytoactivity of a product or a herb, there's a lot of phytoactive chemicals that are properties that go into that, maybe dozens. But each one is a stream of consciousness. Each one represents a stream of knowledge, a stream of wisdom of nature. And how can what do we have to separate that out and say, oh, it's only this that makes sense, and this is all that you need, one active phytochemical in a plant. So when you're preparing herbal products, it's important to capture the totality of nature's wisdom in that product. And remember this, nature has organizing power. Nature has the power to reset, reshape, reorganize all of our physiology back to a state of wellness. And then when you take a herbal product, all those streams of consciousness of the plant are starting to go to work for your betterment. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just think of some specific examples that came out of things. I think you were the first person I heard refer to John Uri Lloyd and some of these that going back, the physiomedicalists, the eclectics, these herbal medical pioneers, botanical medical pioneers, however you want to say it. And back then, it was John Uri Lloyd, I think, that was isolating the alkaloids, right, from plants like golden seal, but saying the berberine without the hydrostein, you're missing like so much because even just between a couple of alkaloids in the plant, he was isolating things to identify them. But I don't think even back then suggesting that we take that one isolated alkaloid, right? Because you'd be
Right. No, they were part of an eclectic medical practice, which at that time was still representing whole plant medicines. And even though they were specific medicines and prepared in a specific way, they were capturing the totality of nature's intelligence. And every single one of our phytoactive compounds in any herbal product, consider it to be a stream of a thread of consciousness. And when you take that product or that herb goes to stitch together the fabric of our wholeness. And that's how we get well through that consciousness that we're ingesting. That is the healing power of nature. It's the number one principle of naturopathic medicine, the vis medicatrix naturae, the healing power of nature. And that's what we embrace and celebrate when we take herbal products.
And then another one, first, do no harm. I think you're a big believer in all of those principles. And these are products, we're talking about making products that are effective, that are safe, but it's part of that consciousness, right? It's in paying attention to the signs and nature and traditional use, and also the science that you come up with that.
Yeah, and you mentioned first do no harm. That's the second principle of naturopathic medicine. Primum non nocere. It translates to be first do no harm. And if you're going to adopt a practice that embraces the totality of nature, you have to abide by this principle, first do no harm, because nature shows up in a way that is always guiding life, always promoting evolution, and we need to work with that concept. And I'm very proud when I formulate to be able to embrace this totality of this principle, first do no harm.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to me to herbs go in and out of vogue, if you will. It's interesting to see what was popular in usage 100 years ago may not be what's popular today, but some herbs have been enduring, many of them for hundreds of thousands of years, right? So it's just so interesting to see the ebb and flow. I think a concept like adaptogens is so missing in the Western approach. And how does the idea of bringing balance relate to herbal medicine as a whole versus the idea of allopathic medicine?
It just makes total sense when you're talking about wanting to create balance in the body has so many there are so many concepts to that when you look in Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese medicine. What does balance really mean? You're talking now about energy systems and you're talking about fundamental tissues in the body that need to be set correctly to be reorganized in order to create balance. Rob, I was just reading last night about ashwagandha, and we all have heard of ashwagandha. And I was updating my knowledge of ashwagandha last night about how far back ashwagandha goes in the Vedic textbooks of India in Ayurvedic medicine, looking at over 5,000 years ago, the use of ashwagandha was adopted in Ayurveda. And this is a herb that goes to the very, very fundamental tissues in the body and targets those tissues to build up the totality of our strength and wellness. So that's where balance really starts from, building up this fundamental force and vital energy in the body. Then that can reorganize and create the balance you're speaking about.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's a paradigm shift. And I think having grown up in America, and probably most of the world is this way, a lot of the westernized world is this way, where we take, as we're coming up, oh, you have a headache, you should take some aspirin, you should take some ibuprofen. And you were certainly probably one of the first people that I heard say, if you look at TCM, a headache begins in the digestive areas, looking a little deeper beyond the symptom. And it's such an interesting thing to me that even if you go allopathic, sort of green allopathy, right, we still wind up with using things like ginger because they find, oh, ginger will stop these inflammatory pathways and different things. But isn't it really just going back to going a little deeper into the system rather than just, it's about going deeper rather than treating a symptom?
Yeah, it's going deeper and drawing upon your vital force. And that's what we call it in naturopathic medicine. And in Ayurveda and in Chinese medicine, there are different terms to really give expression to the same thing. But when you can enliven and move the vital force to the areas where it has become obstructed or where it's become stagnated, then the three pillars of disease, if you will, are dampness, stagnation, and inflammation. Those are the three things that drive us to experience a symptom. And if we can address these three pillars, we can, and this is about really nourishing the vital force and keeping it strong and healthy. You mentioned the gut, and that's a very important part of managing dampness, stagnation, and inflammation.
Yeah, thanks. That's really, I think about, we always in kind of the health food store, little popular culture, natural medicine, people say you are what you eat. And then we came to the point you're not what you eat as much as you are what you actually absorb and assimilate into the cells of your body. And there's an emphasis maybe more on how food is prepared, fermented foods, taking herbs as part of your daily regimen that help stimulate digestion, right? If we're taking, oh, I don't know, bitters before we eat, and even just all these wonderful herbs that support the way our body is supposed to function. And you contrast that with the fast food approach to anything, where I think one of the most popular growing categories in our industry right now is the ready to drink beverage. And
Mhm.
while I get it, I totally get it. And I love a good kombucha, but I think we're missing the mark a little bit by giving there's such a thing, I believe, as meeting people where they are. We want to bring these wonderful herbs and approaches to the people, but we don't want to lose the message in the process of getting it to them to where we've lost what we're trying to give them by making it fit a fast food modality. Does that make sense? Do you think we
Does
can?
make sense. As a practicing medical herbalist, I pay so much attention to what we call delivery system of herbal products. And because if you are wanting to take a herb, first, as a person who's spent what, 35 years now manufacturing herbal products, I need to know that I've made this product in a way that actually is going to do some good for you. And that what is important with that is, did I prepare it in a delivery format where you can actually metabolize it properly and absorb the benefit from it? We always talk about liquids, and then we talk about extracts, and we talk about capsules. What form of delivery is the best form? And also, how was it extracted? How was it prepared? A lot of times when you take like a functional a beverage in a prepackaged, like a can or a bottle, you really can't concentrate these types of products that much. Otherwise, consumers won't enjoy the flavor. You have to be mindful of that. Whereas if you're making it you're from a functional powder, you can add more, you can modify the flavor. There's all kinds of possibilities, but it's important that as somebody who's manufacturing herbal medicines, that I pay attention to our delivery system for the products that we make to be sure that A, you're going to enjoy them, B, they're going to work for you, that they're safe and that they're effective. And there's so much that drives that when we go to manufacture.
Yeah, thank you for making that distinction because it really within any delivery system, you really can make an effective product, I believe. And that is maybe part of the science and the art. It's not to say all gummies are bad or something like that. I don't think we should paint with a broad brush because there is the potential to bring herbal medicines and other kinds of natural remedies to people that wouldn't otherwise get the benefit. So it's good to some extent to meet people where they are.
It is. And I'm very mindful, though, of not being careful about commercializing herbal delivery systems to make them taste good so it would bring broader consumption. My driver is how do I get it to be compatible with a person in a manner where it's going to be optimally absorbed in the body and provide the best outcome for the consumer. That's what my responsibility is.
And I gotta say, I think you've done a great job from what I've experienced thus far with Kokora. I think you hit the mark there. I had Dr. Jeff Burke on in season 2 of Whole Earth Radio, and I was really excited to learn more about Kokora. So as I started seeing the products coming into the health food stores, was really excited to see what direction you were going with that. But I wanted to ask you, transition here a little bit more to talking about Kokora, because I see we talk about geography. I can't help but look at that wonderful canopy I can see there behind you. And I think about your journey as I know it from originating in New England, correct? That was
Correct.
originally Gaia
Correct.
was formed in Massachusetts originally.
Yes. Yes.
And is it true that you had a health food store in Vermont at one point, or is that
No, I think, yeah, there is some kind of, some people think that I was partner with Paul Schulich, who was the founder of New
new chap?
Chapter.
Yeah,
Yeah, do you remember that brand?
I had heard that actually. I wasn't going to ask because I didn't know if it was true, but so that's not true.
No. It's not true. That was Paul's store. He and his wife owned that store. At the time, I worked with him, and we won't both went to herbal school together before I studied my naturopathic work. And then Paul went off to start New Chapter, and I eventually went off to start my practice, which led into Gaia Herbs. But
Nice.
it was a nice journey. Very compatible time together.
I'm just total tangent here, but what was Paul? It was Paul and Barbie at the store?
Yeah, yeah. It was their store is called Mother Earth in Lexington, Mass.
Wow, in mass. Okay, all right. So it's like that game telephone. Somebody tells you something and it's not, it's a little bit off there, but that's really interesting because I think it's so great because I think so much of what I love the way that the health food store world interrelates with botanical academia. And it's like this direct line because everyone just loves plant medicine so much that it relates, whether it's at a store level, it's someone who's operating a mom and pop store somewhere, or to the highest level, there's this continuum because there wasn't that much herbal stuff going on in the 80s. This is
Interesting. When I got into this, I was fortunate enough to meet some of the pioneers of our industry, of the generation that we came from. Wonderful leaders who drove our industry into the success that it is today. Now, a new generation of leaders is beginning to emerge. And I still stay in contact with a lot of the people that really propelled our industry to where it is. And it was all based on whole plant medicine, on understanding the practices of, you mentioned the eclectic medical, the naturopathic medical, the physiomedical schools of thought. That's what we brought to shape herbal products for our industry for the last 30 years. And it's been quite a journey for me, and I've loved it. And I've met some great leaders in our industry.
Yeah, that was what really that was a game changer for me, I think, was because when I started working in a health food store and I had a little bit of background in herbalism, and someone would say, "What is this herb for?" They do it, but what do you take mullein for? They do it backwards, right? Like not which herb do I need? What does this herb do? And there's some you could answer that question somewhat, but as I started to get a picture of what would really be effective, and there was the scientific validation, I began to have more of an appreciation for herbalism as a holistic tradition versus the idea that maybe just everyone over 60 should take ginkgo biloba extract. When it's maybe they shouldn't. Maybe that isn't a good approach because you're trying to make an herb into a drug and you're trying to assume everyone has the same constitution, and it's not really the one size fits all standardized herbal medicine. I feel like it did botanical medicine a disservice in a way.
Yeah, I agree. And I look back when I was practicing in the herbs that I was fond of at that time. It almost appears that now in 2024, I'm working with an entirely different, not entirely, but largely different set of materia medica, which means that I am using herbs now and compounding with herbs that I wasn't necessarily using in such an extent 30 or 40 years ago. And I wonder if it's speaking more to the need of the time. Do have certain herbs risen up now that are necessary for our consumption in order to keep us well, in order to drive inflammation down, or in order to clear stagnation? And I'm paying attention when I recently did a video on rosemary, which I really, obviously, I used rosemary back then, but not to the extent where I'm talking about it and employing it now. And it's just a different set of need states right now that people are expressing. And so we have to go into a broader materia medica to address that.
Do you think that relates to the herbs as food approach versus something that might be just never used as food? I'm trying to think of an example here, something that would have maybe more potential toxicity, and so you'd want to use very carefully versus something that was very safe that you could consume daily and not really need to be so careful with. Is it any of that, or is it more
Well,
just
yeah, it's interesting, Rob, that you mentioned the herbs as food, because I am paying much more attention to include in my meals rosemary and turmeric and ginger and other herbs that were typically considered more herbal supplements. I have rosemary growing here, so I'll go out and I'll pick three large, maybe a foot and a half sprigs of large needle rosemary, and I'll strip the needles from the stem, and I'll take all that rosemary needles and chop it up finely, and it becomes the basis for the dressing for my salad. So when I'm eating a salad, I may be eating large sprigs of rosemary in my salad, and I make it taste good. Or when I'm making rice, I'll put a whole rhizome of turmeric, grate it into my rice to make turmeric rice. And I'll add saffron sprigs to it, which are great for clearing dampness in the body. So I'm adopting an inclusion of some of the herbs that I'm using now as in my medicinary. I'm including them in my day-to-day meal preparation.
Wow, that is so great. I definitely feel like the culture and a lot of people, I feel like we're just moving in that direction because more people seem to be willing to try different foods than they do seem to be willing to try different kinds of other preparations. For example, you said capsules, and I found it really interesting. I had a conversation with somebody recently in a health food store. The degree of scrutiny, and it's good to have scrutiny. You want reputable companies that are third party tested. It's good. But I said, if people gave the amount of scrutiny that they apply to herbal products to the things they take for granted, like ibuprofen, you might have a different view if you were quite as skeptical of what the mainstream pharma just pushes on us and we take for granted in many cases and just assume that it's safe because it's mainstream. Isn't that interesting that now the tables are turning?
Yeah, and you mentioned ibuprofen for pain and inflammation. What if you shifted the paradigm and you created a mechanism where every day when you make your meals, you included astragalus, schizandra berry, jujube dates into these powders of these herbs into your dishes, which I do every day. And what a wonderful way to address stagnation and inflammation in the body. And on Thanksgiving, I cooked meal for friends on Thanksgiving. And I made a beautiful mushroom soup with jujube dates and astragalus, and I put goji berries in there,
Oh,
and
wow.
all intending to lift up the baseline level of wellness so the body's defenses can address the pain and inflammation that we deal with every day.
And the jujube dates to have the cyclic GMP there too, right? That's
I use
the
cyclic AMP. You remember
cyclic
that?
AMP. Thank you. Yeah, close,
Amazing.
close. I need to go back to my notes written inside a protocol journal somewhere, but I remember that formula very well. But yeah, no, I think yeah, cyclic AMP. I think that it's absolutely what you're saying. There is this shift towards if your food can be your medicine and your medicine can be your food, as Hippocrates said, maybe we got to up our game a little bit, though. And maybe we do need to be using not just the broad strokes of what people consider healthy food. Oh, I'm eating a protein, I'm eating a vegetable, eating a variety of foods, incorporating these different herbs, the jujube dates and things that people they we're going to have to go out of their way a little bit to incorporate these foods, although you might be able to grow more of them in your environment than the average person.
Yeah, we have this beautiful farm. It's a regenerative organic farm in Costa Rica where we're growing turmeric and ginger and ashwagandha and passion flower and holy basil, bacopa, and now we're adding moringa trees to our farm.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
So imagine these are some of the most important herbs that are needed today, and they're tropical oriented herbs. So I'm stewarding the cultivation of these through a regenerative organic agriculture. And it's fascinating to see by using regenerative organic how much the nutrient density and how much the yield increases just by tending to the soil food web, which is the microbiome of the soil.
So, how was that journey for you? I know that when you were in North Carolina, that I remember you saying there was more variety in terms of species of plants than almost anywhere else in the country. If I remember, I think.
In that bioregion of the US, yes, North Carolina had a lot of diversity.
But Costa Rica, obviously, as you're alluding to here, one, I got to say, it looks like you made a great choice. I think this time of year, I'm here in Chicagoland. I would probably much rather be in Costa Rica. It looks wonderful, but the regenerative aspect of the farm. So when you wanted to develop this new farm in Costa Rica, it's the CR farm for
Yeah,
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica Medicinal Farms. Yeah, that's the name of it. Or CR Medicinal Farms.
And that is where a good portion of what Kokora is using is being grown. Is that?
Yeah, we're growing a large number of the herbs that we use in Kokora products here in Costa Rica. I'm stewarding them, and I'll give you an example how converting from organic, certified organic to regenerative certified organic, which means that we tend to the soil food web. We nourish the microbiome of the soil, and we do practices like no-till farming to ensure the biome is sustained in the soil. Just growing turmeric organically, 1 year of regenerative organically growing turmeric, our yield went from 15,000 kilos per hectare, which is about 2.5 acres, to 80,000 kilos per hectare. And our concentration of curcuminoids in the turmeric root went from about 2.5% to about 8.5%. There's a big learning here, a huge learning about what can we do to protect the soil food web and to grow the soil food web, and how does that nourish our food and medicine? And actually, the other question is, how does it sustain our gut microbiome as well if we're eating foods that are or taking herbs that are regeneratively grown?
Yeah, and I think that's regenerative as a, I hate to call it this, but it has become somewhat of a buzzword. And this is a way things work in the currency of ideas, right? Things are questioned, ridiculed, and then eventually adopted. I saw that with organics in many cases because when organic produce became a thing and organic certification went through its different stages, in the mainstream, you would see people say, oh, that's really just the same thing. You're just paying more. And for those of us who fought for the regulations to actually mean something and to hold government accountable in how they issue these certifications, saying things like, that's actually not true because they've been trying to degrade what organic means, but the trade organizations have fought back so that it does have integrity. So relating that journey with organic, because one thing about organic, I feel like it's limited. It really is addressing what you're not doing more than it addresses how you are growing. Would you say that's a fair distinction between just organic and regenerative organic?
Yeah, I think it goes beyond that. I think with organic, we can apply organic fertilizers and other amendments to the soil and grow really good crops. But we can do that in soils that are really ultimately depleted from a point of view of life form in the soil. Our soils do require a myriad of microorganisms, beneficial fungi, bacteria, nematodes, protozoa, arthropods. This is what we call the soil food web. And they require all of these organisms to interact in a way that benefits life that emerges from our soils. And when you have a healthy soil food web and you protect it, you have actually a carpet of green all the time over your soil. And that prevents the carbon from escaping into the atmosphere. So when we grow regeneratively, we are actually contributing to carbon drawdown. And we are sequestering carbon and drawing down carbon at the same time, which is a side benefit. And we're getting more nutrient density and we're getting more phytoactivity. We're managing life by the very fundamental form of life, which is the microbiology of the soil. We are managing all of life, including our gut, which manages our individual life. It's fascinating, Rob, and I'm so proud and honored to be representing a brand now that can speak to the value of regenerative cultivation of herbs.
Yeah, and I saw you were taking this even a step further on LinkedIn. I think you were posting some about the idea of regenerative management. So taking a regenerative approach even in the cultural part of the business, the people part, I guess would be the way to say that.
The internal identity of Kokora. Yes, I've established that nature shows up and has been for eternity in a leadership role and managing creation for as long as ever. And it has done so perfectly. And why can't we adopt those same operating principles that we see in nature? Why can't we adopt those operating principles in business and guide business culture and guide business leadership with regenerative principles? So I have written some documents that will probably eventually become a book on the art and science of regenerative leadership and
Wow.
adopting nature's regenerative principles into business practice, business culture, and business leadership.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's really great. I think that it's so needed because just as we're talking about preserving the integrity of botanical medicine, and as it becomes more popular and more commercialized, and you're tracing that directly down to the ground, right? Like from the ground, what would they say, farm to table, but you're really, it's from the seed to the table, really starts at a very small level. And then to maintain integrity all along this chain, we're going to need people who have the right values. Because if there is a process where at some point with commercialization, I don't know, it just seems to be a thing that integrity is ultimately lost as things scale up sometimes because I don't necessarily know why. Maybe you can identify some of those patterns, but I think if I could guess that it might be having number one, the values out front, but the values built in a non-negotiable way where certain things cannot be deviated from in terms of how you interact with people, but also the environment, like a company's commitment to the world around us.
Yeah, you compromise your values when you're showing up every day and making herbal products for people that you likely will never meet, but you own the responsibility for ensuring that what they take is going to lead them to a higher state of wellness. You can't compromise values. You have to show up with an attitude that I am going to embrace the highest values, the values that are existing in nature, and not alter or change those values in any way, because nature does it right all the time. You can't argue with that. Nature does it right. Nature is guiding, managing, governing with supreme knowledge, supreme organizing power, supreme energy, the energy to reshape, redesign, and reset life into a state of health and wellness. Yeah, I think values are so important to honor and show up with integrity in a very authentic way, more so than ever before.
Yeah, oh, 100%. I think you're doing a great job of that with Kokora. I'm so glad that you've decided to push this industry in the right direction and to move that forward with that with Kokora. And rightfully, I see sometimes folks that are founders, everybody, sometimes people want to retire, and it may not even just be what point they are in their life. It may be that they've done enough. And I think that's respectable sometimes, folks. But I see among the most inspirational people what somebody said, and this is maybe a little cliche, but they say if you make your vocation your vacation, you'll never work a day in your life.
Mm.
And it seems like you've really tapped into that where if you're doing work, and I feel this way on a good day myself, if we're tapped into something that really is satisfying something deep in terms of what we believe should happen in the world, and we feel like we're a part of that, it really isn't like working in the way that people think of this terrible slog we just have to get through so we can quit and be on a beach somewhere. That's the American work paradigm. And
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be that way. We can make our lives more fulfilling.
And I would argue it may maybe it shouldn't be that way. Not only doesn't have to be. There's something in Japanese philosophy, there's a term called Ikigai. Have you heard that term before?
No.
Ikigai is a term which means live your life's purpose, adopt a flow of life, and live it for the course of your life. And when you have a purpose, when you wake up every day, that is going to guide life in a way that is very life supporting. Your purpose. What is your purpose for being on this earth, no matter what age you are? I remember a story about a doctor in Japan who was 96 years old, who was having a conversation with his friends, and he had to excuse himself. And he said, "Excuse me, but I have to go into surgery now." And everyone thought he was getting surgery, but he was a cardiovascular or cardiac surgeon. And at 96 years old, he was still doing surgery. And this was his ikigai, his life purpose, his flow. And that's what kept him alive, what nourished him. And we have to pay attention to keep active with what nourishes us and find our purpose and our flow throughout the whole of our life. Even if you choose to retire, you've got to stay purposeful. You've got to keep your ikigai active.
You're doing anything but slowing down. And I really, I think just reading about what's happening with the Ric Scalzo Institute, and really, and I didn't realize this, just to circle back, you alluded to this. When I was familiar with the Southwest College, and it was a college, is why it was called the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, correct? And then the transition to a university. So that was in the last 5, 6 years, or was it
Oh,
longer?
no, more recently, that was probably 3 years ago at the most.
Okay. So that has come on the heels of the Rick Scalzo Institute being founded and that journey of Sonoran growing out of the Southwest College as well.
Yeah, the Research Institute was an important part of the college evolving into a university so it could do research and eventually set up a clinical research institute or aspect of the university. It was a stepping stone to school, the college becoming a university. It's a leader now. It's really doing some special work.
Yeah, that is, it's so fascinating to see the way just in my lifetime all these things have grown. When I was paying attention, and I saw something about the number of just in number of naturopathic physicians practicing in the country has grown by some crazy exponent. I don't know the statistics exactly, but just the practice of naturopathic medicine has grown. I got to figure medical herbalism has grown, and yourself and other founding pioneers. You mentioned some in our industry. Are there any that you can think of when you came into the industry back in the day were inspiring to you in terms of what they were doing in natural products?
Yeah, there were many, and I just a few names that come to mind. Your audience may not know them, but they may. Michael Chiera was
Oh,
one.
wow. Yeah.
Remember Michael?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Michael and Leslie still run, I think they still run the East West School.
Perhaps he was one of them. David Winston in New Jersey, Herbalist and Alchemist is a company that he founded. Who else? Rosemary Gladstar. She's
Oh,
up in.
wow.
Do you remember her?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brigitte Mars. I don't know if you remember Brigitte in Colorado. She was a founding voice in our field. Ed Smith, who founded Herb Farm. You might remember that company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe Jean Rose, not too long ago, recently passed away. One of the first herbal books that I ever had, other than Jethro Kloss, was Herbs and Things, was Jean's.
Yeah. And one of my biggest mentors was Dr. Bill Mitchell. He
Oh,
passed away
wow.
way, way too soon. Do you know him or no?
I actually so I went to Best here for a time when they had a herbal sciences program they were developing. And I took Dr. Mitchell's yoga class in the university district. It was in the basement of a church there. And I am still to this day, a novice in yoga. I am not a yogi by any means, but it's something that I value very much. And yeah, Dr. Mitchell was such an amazing person. And I remember, gosh, so much. He's a real standout. And what's funny, I think a lot of people don't know that he was one of the founders of Bastyr. He doesn't really
Right.
get credit, but he was there in the beginning, Vietnam veteran. And I just,
Amazing man. Totally amazing.
Bill Mitchell, man, I still have a spiral bound book on botanical medicine or herbal medicine. I can't remember
Yeah.
what the title was.
And all his charts and all his logic that he laid out.
Yeah, it was
There was
different. I
another one,
mean,
Rob, Dr. Wade Boyle. He was another naturopathic eclectic doctor that I'll just share a very brief story about
yeah,
what he
please.
did. He was attending a naturopathic college. He passed away way too early as well. And he was speaking to, I don't know, an audience of several hundred people, naturopathic doctors. And he came out with a large handful of books and notes and plopped them onto the podium. And as though he was going to refer to this big glossary of books, textbooks, eclectic physio medical texts. And he paused and he said, "Life is great," and paused for 30 seconds. And then he said, "Nature heals." And then he paused and he said, "God is great." And then he took his notes and said, "Thank you very much," and walked off stage. And that was his talk.
Wow.
He eventually came back on, but he wanted to make a point that what you and I are talking about today, is born in a most practical, simple, and fundamental truth of that can guide our healing. And it's so important to remember that nature isn't distorted. Nature is pure. And that purity of knowledge is what guides us. And I'm so appreciative, Rob, of you embodying some of this wisdom because it's so important to revive today.
Oh, thank you so much. I am grateful to have been along for the ride thus far and look forward to the continuing journey. It is the threads of consciousness, to bring it full circle here, something you were talking about in the plants. And if we can absorb some of that and become some of that and do some good for the world, I think what more could any of us want for, right? And if you're doing it right and you're just trying to get better all the time at what you're doing, it seems so clearly in this new company, you did so much with Gaia. It's hard to believe someone say, could you make a better company? Maybe not, because you did such an amazing job. But I'm guessing that maybe you didn't look at it exactly that way, but it's different because it's a different time, but it can't help but be an evolution because of all that you did before. So maybe Kokora it would be only logical if it is the evolution of everything you had done before now leading up to this.
It is, and then some. It's definitely, we've put so much work in 3 years into ideating Kokora, and I will honestly say that it is the next step, and I'm proud to be on it.
Wow. Thanks so much, Rick. I am really honored to have had you on the podcast. I hope you'll come back some.
Yeah, anytime.
I'd love to talk to you more about, we could really drill down on, there's so many plants, right? And that was one of the things that blew me away. How do you choose? But just to have some insights on how you're choosing the herbs that you work with now. And I really think Kokora is obviously contributing something much needed to the natural products industry these days. So thank you for your continued
Pleasure.
stewardship and involvement.
Thank you, Rob. It's been a pleasure and enjoyed it to speak with you. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Thanks, Rick. We'll talk again.
All righty.